Hi, everyone. Welcome today to our presentation, 10 application mistakes that could get you rejected. Of course, we never want you to be rejected. So the point of this presentation is to give you tips that will help you avoid very common mistakes that applicants make. So my name is Rachel Beck, and I'm a senior consultant at MBA Mission, which is a leading admissions consulting firm. We help people with the entire process of their MBA applications. Just a little background about me. This is my 10th season at MBA Mission, and I love the work that I get to do with my clients who come from all over the world. Prior to coming to MBA Mission, I spent nearly 2 decades at the Associated Press, where I was a reporter, editor, and columnist. And that was a great adventure. And I got to cover a lot of the big business news stories from the 90s and the early 2000s. I am a graduate of Columbia School of Journalism and as well as Columbia Business School. I loved business school and went on to be an alumni interviewer for Columbia for 8 years. So let's get started. Here we are. So this is going to be our agenda for today. Who are the admissions officers and what are they looking for in applicants? We'll talk about that briefly. Then we'll go into our application mistakes. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about MBA Mission and take some of your questions. So let's get started. So who are these people who work in the AdCom, the mysterious people, and what do they want? So they're often graduates of your target MBA program. So many people come back to work in admissions. They're very passionate about the school. They want to build a diverse class. They're not HR professionals. In fact, some people come from very, very varied backgrounds. So you have to know that going in. They're not going to be an expert in your specific field. They're much more general than that. And guess what? They happen to be very nice people. I get questions all the time. I'm so scared to call the admissions office. How about if they're going to write down my stupid question? No, they are terrific, nice, very approachable people. If you have a question, you can call them. And I think in these times of COVID, admissions officers are much more open to hearing from you, right? There's no in-person info sessions that you can go to because everything is basically shut down. So if you have a question and you want to talk to somebody in admissions, give them a call. They're very open to that. As I mentioned before, they're generally nice and seeking to learn about you. I really like this quote from Amanda Carlson, who heads admissions at Columbia. The way I look at it, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, is that when we bring people in, we really want to like them. So we want to do everything we can to give them every shot to put their best foot forward. And this from Bruce Delmonico at Yale. We actually have a consensus-based process, which means we all sit down as a committee and have to be in agreement on the outcome of files of the applicants. We want to get a sense of who you really are. So the admissions committees are not monsters. They want to get to know you, and that's what they're there for. What's the problem facing them? The problem facing them is, if you look in the right-hand column, they have way too many applicants to try and seat a class size that it's much smaller. Now, these are for the top US MBA programs. These are the most competitive schools to get into, but you see like something like Harvard, where there's over 9,000 applicants and they're aiming for a class size of around 900 plus. So that means it's very, very hard to get into the likes of Harvard and Stanford and Wharton, et cetera. And here are some of the other top US schools. So there's many excellent applicants and too few places for them. There aren't enough seats. At the same time, the admissions officers are trying to satisfy all of these stakeholders who really want to have a say in who's in the class. You have the professors who care a lot about having smart students in their classes, right? They want people to have academic potential, so they will participate in class discussions. So it's academic potential and also fit with the school. They want applicants who are really going to advance what the school's basis is about. In terms of students, you would want your class, you would want a class filled with people with strong academics as well as professional potential, as well as social fit. So the admissions officers are looking for people who are going to add components of the classroom, are on their way up professionally, and also know how to socialize. That's very important during the full-time MBA experience. In terms of alumni and recruiters, they're both looking for the same thing. They want people to graduate who are on a strong leadership path, that are rising in their careers. And the dean wants all of these things. And so the dean is basically the boss of the admissions committee, and the deans want to see that the adcoms have done their job and satisfied all these stakeholders. Remember, admissions mistakes are very public. If you accept somebody who is just way out of line with what the fit is academically, socially, professionally, it's hard to hide those people. Important. So what are they looking at when they analyze you? Well, they're looking at your academic potential, your undergrad grades, the kinds of courses that you took, your standardized test scores, your designations. They're also looking at your experience and your leadership potential. So they're looking at your professional path. They're looking at what you've been involved in outside of work. I also call this connection to your community. So it's not just what you're doing outside of work, but what you're doing outside of your direct line of work at work. So that might mean mentorship or training or recruiting. They're looking for just personal accomplishments that you've had. And they really want you to be able to showcase that you're somebody who's well-rounded. They also want to see your career ambitions and whether they mesh with the school and are believable. In terms of interpersonal skills, some of that comes through in your professional journey. A lot of this is going to be highlighted by your recommenders, who are going to be able to show that you're somebody who meshes well with other people. And you want to highlight things that you've done that have worked with other people. This is why the idea of teamwork and camaraderie is so important in an application. And they also want to see that you actually have thought about why you're the right fit with the program, right? What have you done to show that you really have researched the program and it's right for you? Okay, so now let's get into our 10 application mistakes. And I had fun writing this presentation because normally we're talking about all the right things to do, and it was interesting to sit on the other side and think, what could you do wrong? And really it's about, don't do this wrong, here's how to do it right. So just understand my thinking. So the first mistake that I'm going to talk about is vague career goals. This is a big, big problem among applicants. At MBA Mission, we offer free consultations basically every day of the week. So you can sign up with any one of our consultants and have a 30-minute free consultations. And I would say this is the number one thing that people struggle with when we talk to them during the free consultation, is that they don't have attainable goals. You're not going to business school to find yourself. That's not what you're doing. It's very quick. A full-time program, you arrive potentially in late August. By the first, second week in September, you're signing up for clubs and associations relating to what your goals are. By the middle of October, you're already going on recruiting happy hours, et cetera. I mean, I'm talking about the pre-COVID world and hopefully the post-COVID world that this happens. And by January, you're interviewing for internships. So there's not a lot of room to find your path. You need to show the admissions committee that you've already really thought about it and that your career goals make sense. So as I have a line here, I was a software engineer, but when I graduate from my MBA program, I want to work at a hedge fund. So that doesn't work just on that flat surface, because as the reader, I can't understand how software engineering and your goal of working at a hedge fund align, right? That's very hard to see. But how about if you framed it that you worked in software engineering and you're very interested in companies that use software engineers or cloud computing or whatever you might be, and you want to go work at a VC or a hedge fund that's focusing on the industries that you worked in, suddenly it becomes a lot more believable. So think about how you are framing your goals. You also want your goals to be very realistic for the program that you're targeting. This is also a very big problem where people are like, I want to do this. And I'll ask, so like, are there resources at the school for someone who wants to do this? And they're like, oh, I didn't check that. Well, that's something very important to check. As I wrote here, I desperately want to enter retail marketing, though you have no relevant on-campus recruiters or courses in the area. Oh, okay. Well, then you're not going to get it. Some little tips is you could look at the employment report that every school releases, and you can see what kind of companies and industries recruit at a particular school. You can see, I want to go to this school. Oh, only 1% of its graduates went into that industry for the last 4 years. Oh, maybe that's not the best school for me to target. So that's something that's really, really important. I want to also point out that we have a free personal statement guide right off of our website, and that will help you show how you can really write goals that are attainable and realistic. I think that will help you see it, so you understand what I'm talking about. Additionally, don't think of certain schools in very stereotypical lights. Like, all of the top MBA programs have very wide-ranging programs. So you don't want to just say, oh, Kellogg, that's just for marketers. It also is very good in consulting, finance, real estate, nonprofit. The employment report will show you exactly the breakdown so you can see for yourself. And I think that's important. Mistake number 2, lacking school knowledge. This is an easy win, and it's a terrible loss if you don't do it. You want to be able to demonstrate fit. You want to be able to show the schools that you're somebody who really understands why it's the right school for you. And that requires research. That requires talking to students and alumni. It requires going on the school's website. It requires reading our insider guide. So signing up for virtual info sessions. So there's a lot. Not all these programs are exactly the same. And that's something that you want to really keep in mind. Like, where it's located, the class size. Maybe you're somebody who loves the idea of going to a Harvard where there's 900 students, or you're someone who's like, I want something a lot more intimate. Darden is the right fit for me because I like that intimate setting. Do you want the core curriculum that's mandatory, or are you looking for something more flexible? In terms of recruiting, are firms you're interested in coming to campus? So these are the things you really have to think about. So you can't just say, I want a top 5 school without thinking about, well, do they offer me what I want? So you have to also then reveal fit, right? So you've done this exercise of researching the schools. Then you have to show the schools that I really have spent time researching you, and this is what stands out, right? And the admissions officers have tons of great applicants. Why are they going to choose you over somebody else? Well, this is one of those moments where they see that you actually put the time in. So as I mentioned before, the schools have great websites. They have social media presence. We have a blog that you can search for free. We have our insider guides right off our website for free. Don't be shy about calling alumni and students and asking them, hey, do you have 10, 15 minutes where you can just share your experiences about the school with me? We're living in this virtual world now. Almost everybody is working remotely. They have time. There's no commuting. So don't ignore that. Visit the schools virtually. They're offering so many different ways that you can get in touch with them. They're offering online info sessions. They're doing diversity days. They're doing meet and greets with student ambassadors. They're having professor coffee chats. Sign up for everything. I know it takes time, but it's really worth it. Lastly, you don't want to tell the school something that they already know. Like, as you're trying to show your fit, you want to show things that show you went above and beyond. So like saying, Columbia Business School is in a global financial capital. Well, of course it is. But why is that important to you? What are you going to get out of it is very, very key. So here we have an example. So here's our first example, which is Columbia is a great school for entrepreneurs, and New York City is an exciting place for me to take professional risks because so many great fortunes have been built there. I really believe the Lang Center for Entrepreneurship offers the wealth and resources necessary for me to take the next steps as an entrepreneur. So the problem with this, let's just call essay, paragraph, is that saying Columbia is a great school for entrepreneurs doesn't give any detail. You want to give detail. Saying I really believe that the Lang Center for Entrepreneurship offers the wealth of resources necessary. Well, what are those wealth of resources? So then when you read this, you start seeing how bringing in real detail can matter. As an aspiring entrepreneur in the online education field, I know that flexibility will be crucial to my success and that I will need to constantly challenge my assumptions. For this reason, I would seize the opportunity to participate in the entrepreneurial sounding board process by scheduling a session with Russell Sarter, whose vast experience in online education will no doubt lead to an invaluable critique of my ideas. Thereafter, I'd hope to take my refined concept to the Lang Center's incubator. So you can see from the second paragraph that we list here, there's so much more meat to it, right? So it's so clear that the applicant didn't rush, but really got to think about how this program fits with him or her. And that's really important. So mistake number 3 is ignoring academic weakness. And when I was asking my colleagues over the weekend about like, oh, what mistakes do you think applicants make? This came up over and over again. Because many people try to gloss over their academic weakness as though the admissions committee won't see it. So remember why we care about your stats, okay? We care about it because the schools want to feel assured that you can manage the coursework, and they don't want your weakness to hurt their averages that they have to report to the ranking. They really want you to help their averages. So keep that in mind. So a strong GPA, a strong GMAT, strong GRE, they tell you that they can, manage the coursework. And that's really important. You also have things like certification courses, work experience that can also reinforce that you can manage the coursework. I actually should have changed the GRE box because as of now, really just recently, the GRE scores are going to be sent to the ranking organization. So that means that that's going to factor in a lot more. For the last few years, they haven't supplied those to the ranking organization. So you could do a little bit weaker on the GRE and you wouldn't be punished for it, but that's changing now. So you see here that the top schools have high GPA averages, right? 3.7, 3.6, over 3.5. And it's impressive, right? But it's not a one size fits all. Like the easy answer is, oh, I need a GPA of 3.5 to 3.7, but that's not necessarily true. And we see plenty of applicants who have lower than that. So you want to think about, well, what grading scale did my university use, right? Like if the people who are summa cum laude had were a 3.7 and higher, that might tell the school, oh, well, that was a little bit harder grading scale, right? Also, what was your major? I was a government major. I went to Lehigh University. I was a government major. It wasn't a walk in the park, but it definitely wasn't as difficult as my friends who are mechanical engineers. They worked a lot harder than I did. So there's a little more forgiveness in the majors that are a bit more technical and a bit more difficult. Some schools will look at your class rank. Not all colleges provide that. If you work during college, so don't write yourself off if you have a 3.3, but you worked 40 hours a week to put yourself through college. So there's some understanding there, and that's looked very favorably upon. Maybe your freshman year wasn't great and you really suffered, but you did well your sophomore, junior, and senior year. They accept that as well. They also want to see how did you fare in your quant and management courses? If those exist on your transcript, they don't for everybody. If you got all C's, then that might be a problem. But if you did well in those in college, that might help you. So understand that. In terms of the GMAT score, you also have to dig down a little bit too. So how did you do on the quant side? That's what the schools care about most about, is the quant side of your GMAT. They're looking for, especially the top schools, a base of a 47 or 48. They want to see that or higher. The verbal side doesn't matter as much. The IR score is coming more and more into view. So let's say you have a 730 GMAT, but then you score a 3 on the IR. That tends to look a little bit problematic to the admissions committee. They start wondering, what happened? Like, why didn't they do well? I've had clients go back and take the GMAT again just to bolster their IR score so they could write about it in what's known as an optional essay. They also want to see, how do your scores relate to your GPA? So let's say you're somebody with an undergrad GPA of a 3.0, but you get a 750 on the GMAT. A little bit's forgiven in your 3.0 GPA. Let's say if you have a 3.9 GPA, but you have a 620 GMAT, that hurts you, right? So you did so well in college, but you can't get that GMAT score up. So that's just something to keep in mind. So if you aren't doing well, and here's some of the averages you see here in terms of GMAT. So I think something important to understand is a lot of schools give ranges of their scores. So let's look at the top line for Stanford. So the high score for the class of 2021 was a 790, which is very impressive. And the lowest score was a 600. So I would say every single week during my free consultations, someone's like, will come with a GMAT score that's on the lower side of the range that a school provides. And they will say, but it's within the range. And you have to understand that when you're on the lower end of the range, it's very, very hard to get in. And you have to know that going into the process. There's not 50 people at Stanford who got a 600. There might be one. So just understand that. The ranges, when you're on the bottom end of the range, it's very difficult to get in. So as I mentioned before, if you have an academic weakness, you want to address it. Most schools offer what's known as an optional essay where you can explain away these deficiencies as well as other things. So you can talk about your grades or your test scores. You also, if you have an employment gap or you're not having your direct manager write your recommendation, that can go in there too. An optional essay is not an opportunity to include an essay from another school that you just think is great. You don't want to include that there. If you don't address weak grades or standardized test scores, then you're letting the AdCom decide why you're deficient. So I always say it's like better to put your own spin on the story than let the admissions committee decide what the story is. So for instance, I have a line here from an essay. Adjusting to college life at first was difficult and I struggled to balance my academic requirements with my newfound social freedom. Okay, own it. I did terrible my freshman year, but I turned things around. Or in the middle of my sophomore year, I made the difficult decision to change majors. So that might explain to the admissions committee why there was this, very weak start to college. But once you settled into subject matter that was interesting to you, you really rebounded. So that's something to understand. You can also talk, I've had clients who've struggled at points during college because they've had parents who are ill or a financial situation that rattled them. And you can explain that in an optional essay. Even if a school gives you 500 words, you don't have to write 500 words. So note that. So mistake number 4 is picking the wrong recommender. Everyone listen up because this is important. With recommendations, title doesn't matter. It's how well the person knows you. Many applicants want to pick that managing director because they have that higher title. But unfortunately, when there's too many people between you and the person way high up, that person way high up doesn't know good stories to tell about you. And that's what's so important. Recommenders need to be able to tell compelling and detailed stories about you. They need to give specifics. Often when somebody's too high in an organization, they haven't seen you really work. And many schools ask this question, which is, tell us a piece of constructive feedback that you've given the applicant and how has the applicant responded? So if you're picking somebody who doesn't really know you, they cannot answer that question. And something to really understand about the recommendations is that many schools, the word count for the recommendations is more than the word count for the essays that you're providing. So the recommender has a lot of power in this process. So if somebody doesn't really know you and is writing on your behalf, can really, really lead to rejection, right? Because the admissions committee will be able to see through that. And I think that's very important. So your direct supervisor is the best choice if you have a good relationship with that person. If you don't and want to choose someone else, you have to then acknowledge that in the optional essay. A former manager could also be a good choice. It's very important also to keep the recommenders on task. They are notoriously late, they miss deadlines, and then you would be bumped to another round. The schools don't care that the recommender didn't have time. That just doesn't work. So we're basically closing in on August 1st, so this would be a really good time to ask your recommenders to get moving. You can give them the dates ahead of time. Like I would never say, if a deadline was September 15th, I would never put September 15th as your deadline that you want the person to submit it. I would say September 7th, so they get it in well ahead of time. You also want to point out to them, and some of this can just come in an email. Here's the process that's going to take place. I'm going to submit your email to the school. They're going to send you the materials. I'd like you to submit by September 7th, so there's time before my application is due. These are the kinds of questions that you're going to get asked. Please make sure you answer every question. Sometimes recommenders just won't answer the constructive feedback question. I also have my clients put together some bullet points for the recommenders just as a tip sheet, so the recommenders know those ideas, ahead of time. Like, oh, in this specific case, I did this, and it led to that, and then the recommender has something in front of them that they could use. I'm absolutely against the applicant writing the recommendation. I think that's a terrible, terrible idea. It can absolutely lead to rejection. So note that if the business schools feel that the applicant had a hand in the recommendations, you will be rejected immediately. So that's something very, very important to note. So mistake number 5 is forgetting your audience. So who are you writing for is kind of the crux of this. And many people forget that the admissions committee members are the people who are reading this. They don't come from your background or experience. You need to write in a way that resonates with them. So you have to stop thinking of these essays as the kinds of essays that you did in college. Instead, think of them as narratives where you're sharing pieces of your life, and that's really important. You want them to keep learning about you. So every single story that you tell adds meaning to who you are. So you don't want to just say, I did this at work, I did this at work, I did this at work, but you want to think, who am I holistically? That's how they are looking at you. You also want to use first person perspective. You want them to see the story through your eyes. So here we have a narrative example here. So 4 months after graduating from college, I started the merchandise planning department at Ralph Lauren in Manhattan. I was given minimal responsibility at first, but I did everything I possibly could to earn more each day. Given a simple task to plan a small display for our stores nationally, I read Paco Underhill's Why We Buy and voraciously devoured all data in our systems, presenting proof for why this display should go to the front of the store. So it's not bad, but it's not amazing. It's a lot of I did. So here we're going to learn a little bit more. Growing up in Crookston, North Dakota, I would have never dreamed that I would one day work at Ralph Lauren in Manhattan. Admittedly, I was a bit starstruck when I started as a merchandise planner, completely unaware of where the bar was set there for a job well done. I took small assignments like placement of a men's cologne display and immersed myself in a way that may have seemed overzealous. I remember my boss saying, you read Why We Buy to make a suggestion to move this table 12 feet. Instead of pride, I felt a bit embarrassed. But so you can see, like, there's a lot more context in storytelling. Like, wow, I'm so interested. This person came from, North Dakota and now is working at Ralph Lauren in Manhattan, which is considered like the pinnacle of style in New York City. I want to learn more about this person. And that's why you have to know your audience. And you want to write for the admissions committee. You want to write things that they want to read. And it's very important. And if they're bored, you're rejected. And that's why it's an application mistake. You want to also watch out for jargon. A lot of people who are engineers or technologists or even in complicated finance roles tend to try to put things in there that I don't understand. I see resumes all the time where I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. This is not clear to me. So you want to make sure that you're writing, even on your resume, for a very average reader. You don't want to like overwrite either. Like, as I gaze at the New York skyline, which represents the hopes and dreams, blah, blah, blah. You don't want to write like that. Think about having each sentence be less than 10 words or less, and you will convey so much more. You don't want to use more words than needed to convey an idea. Like, I was engaged in the pursuit of passing my CFA exam. How about I studied hard for my CFA exam? That conveys the same thing. And also this excessive cinnamon use. I coach, guided, and mentored. Those basically all mean the same thing. So you want to write in a way that's very conversational and very simplistic. I tell my clients all the time, read your essays out loud, hear what you're saying. Because when you start overwriting and filling things with jargon, when you read it out loud, you'll say, oh God, that sounds terrible. So note that. Mistake number 6 is telling, not showing. Now, normally we say show, don't tell, but a lot of people tell and don't show. And it can be an application breaker because you're not really telling anything. You're just making statements that are somewhat meaningless. So, for instance, I am an initiator. We get that all the time. People are saying, I initiate. Well, what did you do? Why don't you show instead how you initiated? And it's much more powerful. So when I first joined the company, I noticed there was a lack of training materials for new hires. After I became settled into my role, I pitched my manager to let me work on developing a manual on my own time. Within a month, the training program was ready for the next set of new hires. That shows initiation versus you telling them, I initiate. And the difference in that kind of writing really let your story shine through. And it's very, very powerful. So if you had essays that were just tell and they didn't have any self-awareness and self-reflection, it would be very, very boring for the reader and they wouldn't really get to know about you. So you want to make sure that you're showing, not telling. So here's another example. I grew up in a successful family and took nothing for granted. Many judged me as spoiled, but few knew that I was working incredibly hard from an early age. My parents had no toleration for me being idle. My days were filled with chores, and I worked odd jobs in high school. Hard work became core to who I am and continues to shape me to this day. So this paragraph doesn't really tell us anything. Yes, we know that this person worked very hard, but we don't even know what that work means. Worked really hard in school, worked really hard at a job. What does it mean that the parents didn't have any tolerance for this applicant being idle? I'm not sure what that means. Days were filled with chores and I worked odd jobs. So you get to the next paragraph here. It's easy to make assumptions about Junior when Senior is so successful. My father used every ounce of the determination that enabled him to build his firm to ensure that none of his children were spoiled. For me, that didn't just mean that I was expected to get good grades and compete hard at high school sports. It meant that I pumped gas for 20 hours a week, starting in the 9th grade, to pay for school trips and to walk around with pocket cash. I learned early that I could take nothing for granted. Wow. So now we know that this young man got, even though he was, well off in his world, he worked 20 hours a week pumping gas. That does show hard work, and that he was learning not to take anything for granted. It's much more compelling. And as we say here, showing, not telling, or telling, not showing. The second one is showing, and the first one is telling. And you can hear the difference, and it makes it really, really much more meaningful. So mistake number 7 is oversharing details. And through this presentation, I've mentioned that you want to tell personal stories, right? You want them to not just know, I did this at work and I did this at work and I did this at work and I did this at work, because that's really boring. But you have to remember what's appropriate to tell and what's better not to tell. They want to hear your stories, but they want there to be some value in what they're learning. So you don't want a story that frames you in a negative light. You don't want a story that would raise the alarms that you might not be able to handle your MBA studies. That usually doesn't go over well. But you do want to tell stories that show how you've learned and grown through the years. That, again, that self-reflection and self-awareness is so, so, so important in your application. The admissions committee doesn't want to know every last detail about you. Dirty laundry has no place in an application. It will be set aside and you won't get in. But learn how you're going to look across your life and think what compelling stories matter. Mistake number 8, rushing the application. This is right now, right? People are starting to mobilize right now as they're looking toward the deadlines that are 6, 8, 10 weeks away. So my best advice is time matters and don't delay, right? During the free consultations that I have all the time, people are like, well, I need to get started. Okay, let's start today, I'll say, because procrastinating only hurts your chances. Every piece of the application takes time. And if you're trying to cram it all together, then you don't have time to really think about it. I can tell when essays are rushed. When they are written in a day, they read terribly. They're sloppy. The thoughts aren't really connected. You want to give yourself some time because you want to be able to approach it with fresh eyes. So what I mean by fresh eyes is you finish your essay and you set it aside for a week or 10 days or 2 days, and then you go back to it and you read it again. And that fresh eyes will help you see mistakes. It will help you decide if it's what you want to say. But it's very hard to do fresh eyes if you're right up to the deadline. You also have to remember that your recommenders need time. You can't just throw this material to the recommender and say, get it done by next week. It will lack depth. And we typically say a recommender needs about 4 to 6 weeks to complete their recommendations. It shouldn't take them that long, but it does take them that long. So you don't want to be one of these people that's like racing to the end. A few years ago, a client complained to me, there's so much to do. I'm so tired. Oh my God. And I was like, it's 2 or 3 months of constant work on your applications. But if you get into the school of your dreams, won't it be worth it? So she's long graduated from Harvard Business School and clearly setting aside her social life and everything else really, really ended up her getting to where she wanted to be. So I think that's important. A last thought here is the time crunch usually leads to unintended sloppiness. When you don't have time to read things over and read them out loud, you get sloppy and you don't find your mistakes. So do not rush the application. Here we have just a kind of a chart of how the flow could go for applications. And obviously this is like in a perfect world, but we really think about how our clients can best maximize the time that they have. And I think that's important. Mistake number 9 is not being true to you. One of the big problems with MBA applicants is they believe that they have to tell stories that the admissions committee wants to hear versus the stories that are true to themselves. You always want to go with the stories that are true to you. And Derek Bolton, who was formerly head of admissions at Stanford, wrote, because we want to discover who you are, resist the urge to package yourself in order to come across in a way you think Stanford wants. Such attempts simply blur our understanding of who you are and what you can accomplish. So you don't want to go into this process and say, well, I don't want to apply to Chicago Booth or Columbia or Stern because they're just finance schools, or Kellogg is just a marketing school, or Berkeley and Yale are just nonprofit schools. So I'm not even going to look at those because those are all they want. Or you say, I'm going to tell a marketing story at Kellogg because it's a marketing school, or I'm going to tell a finance story at Columbia because it is a finance school, even though I have no experience. That can absolutely botch your chances of getting in. You want to be true to yourself. You want to tell the stories that matter to you. So if you're really struggling to tell a story at a school, then it might not be the right school for you. And you need to be willing to accept that. And lastly, mistake number 10 is missing the question. And this is a simple slide. It is so important to answer the question that the schools are asking you. I say to my clients, as soon as you begin outlining your essays, put the essay question on top so you're sure you're going back and looking at it over and over again and answering the question. Because when you don't answer the question, you're immediately put in the rejection pile. Not like anything's printed out, by the way, it's all online, but you're immediately swept into the rejection mailbox because you haven't done the basic task of answering the question. Now, you would say, who's not going to answer the question correctly? Well, this happens all the time. People like to cut and paste from other schools, but they have to make sure that they're really looking what the question is that's being asked. There might be small differences between different schools, and it's important that you're answering the question that the schools want. And we reached the end. So let me just tell you a little bit about MBA Mission and take your questions. So we are ranked #1 by Poets and Quants, and also very highly ranked on GMAT Club. We have over 500 verified reviews. We're the only firm that every consultant working for us works full time. That's great. I'm so happy about that. We are always working for you with events like today. Thank you for coming today and listening to me. We have lots of different free materials on our website, including our complete start to finish guide, our insider guides, our interview primers, as well as career primers. Sign up for a free consultation. I'd love to talk to you, or you can talk to anybody at our firm. We also have different kinds of services, from our complete start to finish package to hourly services to mock interviews to a specialized mock for the Wharton team-based discussion. Our team, this is just some select members, is very diverse, but we all have extensive writing and editing backgrounds, and everybody went to a top school. So that's where I'm going to finish. I'm going to click this off, and here I am ready to go. Does it count that how much we socialize with alumni and missions committee? I don't know if the word count is right, but as you get to know, as you talk to alumni and you talk to AdCom members and you talk to students, you are learning more about the school and why it's the right fit for you. So Columbia in particular asks you who you've talked to at the school and how you've interfaced and who you know. So that's one school where it does kind of count. But otherwise, it helps you develop a stronger story. Is it okay if I apply, but I'm planning to retake the GMAT? How can I explain that in my essay? You have to look at what the requirements are at a particular school. Some schools cut off when you can take the GMAT before the application is due. Wharton is one of those schools. I think you can't submit 2 weeks before the application deadline. So that's something that you would need to sniff out. Obviously, if you retook it soon and got a better score, they'll gladly take the better score. But some schools won't take additional material after the deadline. What do you feel a hospitality professional has to gain from an MBA, and what fields would open up post the program? I mean, obviously, hospitality before COVID was a very, very hot industry, and I think, somewhere down the road, hopefully soon, it's going to become a hot industry again. There's a lot of customer loyalty, customer retention, et cetera, that goes into hospitality. And that might work nicely if you were interested in a marketing or brand management career path, luxury goods path. So I think there's different pathways that you can take. Every single person has a different reason for wanting an MBA. It depends what your background is and what you need from an MBA. Like, do you need the educational resources or the foundational knowledge? Or are you trying to expand your management and leadership tools, whatever it might be. I think that there was so many problems with the GMAT over the last few months because so many testing centers were closed that I think not having the AWA right now is okay. Like you didn't really have a choice. You might just explain that in an optional essay. I don't think that most schools are looking at that so closely. Like they care more about your quant score and your IR score than that. If not, I'm not able to choose my supervisor, who would be the best alternative for my current workplace? Would a colleague who works closely with you work? It's really important to get somebody who has had some oversight with you. I think that that's matters because you have to be able to answer the constructive feedback question. And if you can't answer that, then that hurts your recommendation, right? So think of a former supervisor, but a colleague who's on the same level as you typically does not work. What's your take on the expected volumes of applications this fall? Will it increase or decrease in light of COVID? I think it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of applicants this fall. We already know that some foreign admitted students are deferring to a fall 2021 start date. So we're assuming that some of the seats are taken in some classes. So that means class size could be reduced, though we're hearing that some schools might increase class size. We just don't know. I think application volumes will be up because people during tough economic times tend to reevaluate where they are in their career, and going back to school, business school, or whatever it is tends to happen during these times. So I think this is going to be a very competitive fall. In terms of the H-1B visas, I wish I had an easy answer on that, but like everything is changing all the time and I just don't know what's going to be. When this evaluation process really favors storytellers over merit, I don't think a school should be looking at good stories. It's an MBA college. I think you're missing the point. I think if you need to be able to convey your merit through good stories. They're not just taking people who are good at writing, they're taking people who are demonstrating their leadership. And you don't want to just say, I'm a superstar. You want to tell stories that reflect you're a superstar. So I think that's what I'm trying to get at. That it's not, yes, you still have to be successful, but you have to convey your success in a way that's readable. In terms of volunteer work, I think I like to use a broader definition. I like to use connection to your communities over community service. With community service, you give time and effort to a cause that's meaningful to you. And I'm not downplaying that because I think that's still important. But if you think of it as connections to your community, you could tap into a lot of different things. Maybe you've done a lot at work outside of your direct line of work. I mentioned this earlier. Maybe you've helped with recruiting. Maybe you have helped with an internship program. Maybe you were a mentor to junior staffers. Maybe you sat on a diversity committee. Maybe you're connected to your undergrad university and you volunteer for an alumni association, or you mentor current students who were part of a club that you were part of in college. Maybe you're part of a religious group and show leadership there. Maybe there are things that you just do that are really just strong interests and you go above and beyond in those things. So there's lots of different pathways that you can take to show your connection to your community versus just calling it volunteer work. So that's the way I would frame it. What does it mean when the essay questions ask you what can offer to the school or program? What are they expecting us to tell them? An example. So for instance, what are you going to contribute is a question that comes up a lot. So if you were somebody who was, let's say, president of your fraternity in college, and you served on like the main governing committee for all the fraternities at your school, that's something that you might want to parallel during business school. So you want to leverage your experience on the interfraternity council when you get to Wharton as an active member of the, I'm making up the name because I don't remember it off the top of my head, but like the Wharton Executive Council, which would be like the student government. So that's something you can contribute. Or if you're somebody who's very involved in a volunteer program and you want to build on that or leverage that when you get to Columbia, when you're going to take part in the nonprofit board leadership program, where you're going to share your learnings from this program with other nonprofits that you're helping. So that's the way they're trying to tie your past to kind of how you're going to be active within the school community. This is a good question right now. Does an employment gap hurt an application? Not necessarily, especially right now, right? Right now, there's going to be people who have employment gaps because the global economy is shaky right now and people are losing their job, and that it's okay. When I first started in admissions consulting in 2011, a lot of my clients in that first and second year had pretty large employment gaps after the financial crisis, and it didn't impact their ability to get into business school. So I think if you explain the employment gap and talk about what you did during the employment gap, then it's fine. Obviously, if it's like a 2-year employment gap and you really don't have any explanation, that would hurt you. But as long as and I touched on this during the presentation, like as long as you explain things in your optional essay, then you've set the bar for the schools. You're setting the spin. They don't get to then decide, oh, he's lazy, he didn't look for a job for a year and a half. So keep that in mind. Does it make sense to mention you want an industry shift post-MBA despite having no experience in the desired industry? So this is a good question because you don't want to say like, I want to go from, software engineering to the hedge fund. We used that example before without kind of helping, and I'm using my hands here because I literally am thinking about dropping the crumbs. Like in a lot of cases, you want to be able to drop the crumbs between what you've done and what you want to do to show them that this is not just this radical right turn that you want to do and you don't even know if that's really what you want to do. So if there's any way to tie something in your past to this new thing you want to do in the future, that would help you greatly. Like for instance, I had a client a number of years ago who was working in asset management at one of the bulge bracket banks. Like she was, did very well there, but she really wanted to go into retail and luxury goods. She had learned a lot about financial markets and analysis when she was working in wealth management, but she wanted to make this change. So we looked for parallels. First of all, she had done an internship at a major luxury brand after her freshman year in college. So we included that. She also, working in wealth management, was interfacing regularly with wealthy people and had that kind of client relationship. So we built that up to talk about her interest in luxury goods, where she would be dealing with the same kind of client mindset, just in a different forum. So that's a way to show it and kind of tie your past to your future. Oh, thank you. Perfect. Are there schools that allow submission of letter post-round deadline? If they submitted later, would it weaken the application in any way compared to someone who got it in on time? You have to get it in on time. There's no past deadline. I mean, sometimes they'll say you can get it in a day late, but why would you risk your chances? Tell your recommender it's due a week before and have them submit it. Um, I think my point though, this was asking like that define schools like Yale's a nonprofit. My point is that no, it isn't just a nonprofit. People give these schools reputations, and then other people decide, oh, I shouldn't apply there because it's just nonprofit, which is completely wrong. Yale is an amazing, well-rounded business school. So unfortunately, we don't have a document, but fortunately, we don't have a document because they're don't look at it that way. But you can go and look at every school and see where people ultimately go in their careers to kind of get a sense of where's the areas of interest. I, I don't know what the right answer to this question is. Talking about an industry shift, does the MBA help, or is it better to go into a specific type of master's instead? An MBA is going to teach you a lot about many things relating to business, finance, operations, marketing, management, etc., accounting, etc., and also offer you a lot in terms of management and leadership. But I don't know enough about you and what you want to do. Like, if you want something so specific and you only want that, then maybe a specific master's program is the right fit for you. I don't know. Any more questions? Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Sign up for your free consultation. If you have any interest in talking to me or any of my colleagues, we can spend a half hour talking about whatever you want. And thanks so much.